Welcome to the Home Team, the show where no matter who you cheer for, here you're part of the home team. I'm your host, Wyatt Bagnall, and today we are going over the coaches who, one quarter of the way through the season, have their seat heating up. I'll be ranking the coaches on the hot seat today. I'll be doing my top five, an honorable mention, and then a couple little surprise ones, or a couple who maybe are on the fringe of this, but we'll see. So, before we jump in, hit like, hit subscribe, share the video with anyone you know who likes football. I would really appreciate it. And without any further ado, let's jump in. So, I'm going to start with my honorable mention for the top five. And that's because I don't think there's anything that could happen in this regular season, unless it was to just go catastrophically wrong, that could get this coach fired. And that is Mike McCarthy. I believe that in terms of Mike McCarthy, his entire fate is going to be determined by how the Cowboys perform in the playoffs. They've been 12-5 numerous times under him. They reach the playoffs, and then it all falls apart, and they lose in spectacular fashion. The most recent of which being decimated at home by Green Bay in the wild card round. That is something that can't happen again if Mike McCarthy wants to keep his job. And I'm not even sure if technically this would be a firing, because he's not on, his contract does not go past this year. So I'm not sure if this would technically count as being fired, or so much as they just didn't renew his contract. But either way, if he and the Cowboys don't make some noise in the playoffs this year, I don't suspect he'll be back as head coach of the Cowboys. So he's my honorable mention because I think that his fate will come a little bit later. The rest of these guys, I think that the way that the regular season goes will very much be indicative of if they get to keep their job. So starting at number 5, I have Brian Daboll. So the Giants are obviously not in a good place. I don't think any of us thought coming into this year that the Giants were going to be a juggernaut. And I think everybody knew that there was some noise around Brian Daboll and the security of his job. However, I think that this is somebody who is a talented coach. He's obviously most famous, and he got this job because of his work in Buffalo with the Bills and helping to mold Josh Allen into the player that he is today. And the hope was that he could do the same for Daniel Jones. However, I would say that in many ways, Brian Daboll was doomed by the organization of the New York Giants, much more than his own coaching prowess. The Bills are much more structured. Sean McDermott has the defense running well. The Bills have shown patience much more than the Giants have ever shown. And I don't believe that the Giants ever had enough clarity about their situation to make proper decisions about who to pay, who not to pay. And as a result, they're stuck in a really bad situation, and I think that Brian Daboll is going to be the person that pays the price for it. Do I think that's fair? No. Do I believe that he's somebody that could be hired by another team? Yes. Whether that's as a head coach, I think that would depend on the situation. But I believe that he would be snapped up pretty quick to be at the very least an offensive coordinator. And I just believe that Brian Daboll's a good coach that's likely going to pay the price for organizational dysfunction. Number 4, I have Nick Sirianni. The Eagles are a very talented team, and that is a huge problem for Nick Sirianni. There's just something off about the Eagles. They don't look dominant. Their defense has not improved. Jalen Hurts is not 2022 Jalen Hurts. That appears to be more of an outlier than a consistent thing with him. I think he's a good player. I don't think he's necessarily this transcendent player. He certainly hasn't been to start this year or really for any part of last year. But the other thing that has me thinking Nick Sirianni is in danger. Number 1, it was discussed this offseason whether or not he would keep his job. And the Eagles pretty openly had to think about it and discuss it and figure it out internally. Second, the Eagles organization has been known to give the hook to people. Doug Peterson won the Super Bowl there in 2017, and just a couple years later, he was gone. The Eagles are not a very patient organization. The most patient they were was with Andy Reid because he's Andy Reid and was doing awesome things and had them competitive even when the rest of their team wasn't great. But right now, the rest of their team is very talented and they are not showing up the way they need to. And I believe that Nick Sirianni is in a fair amount of danger. I think for him to keep his job, they would have to make a deep playoff run. I don't think just making the playoffs is enough. And God forbid they miss the playoffs, he will be gone. Number 3 is Matt Eberflus of the Chicago Bears. I think he's a lame duck coach, and this duck should have quacked in the offseason. I don't know why the Bears kept him around. You think they would have learned from their mistakes of bringing in young quarterbacks with a coach who really clearly doesn't have a future with the organization? There's not much sense to Matt Eberflus continuing to be the coach of the Chicago Bears. Is the defense better? Sure. But the singular priority of the Bears should be Caleb Williams. And I don't believe Matt Eberflus is the best coach to help develop Caleb Williams. They need somebody who's an offensive mind. They need somebody that they can pair with Caleb Williams for his career. Not somebody who, if he comes in and it works really well, he'll be poached to go to another team to develop that guy, but be tied to him. This is a team where this coming offseason, everybody in this organization should be trying to pursue Ben Johnson to leave Detroit and come to Chicago to coach Caleb Williams. I think it's just a necessary move. Matt Eberflus, I think he's done a good job with their defense, but I just don't think he fits what they need to be right now. And I don't think that he has the rest of that team firing to the level that it needs to. I mean, their defense is playing well, but their offense is consistently stagnant, and they seem to just be behind with everything. And when the future of your franchise is hinging on the development of this young quarterback, I think that you need to make some tough decisions about that. And I get the feeling Matt Eberflus is going to be replaced. Number 2, I have Robert Saleh. Now, I know a lot of people would think that the Jets coach, Robert Saleh, could be number 1 on this list. However, I believe that there's a pretty simple way that he keeps his job. They need to make the playoffs. They have not made the playoffs since, I believe, 2010. And I believe that the moment that they are eliminated from playoff contention, if they are, is the moment that he loses his job. The Jets, it's very simple. It's playoffs or bust, and ideally, deep playoff run or bust. But I do believe that there's some leniency there, just depending on the way that it was to end. If they miss the playoffs, he's gone. If they were to be embarrassed in the playoffs, he might be gone. And I think that the unspoken thing in a lot of this is Aaron Rodgers will have a pretty significant voice in this decision. I believe that Saleh is a very good defensive coordinator. We've seen him coordinate some top-notch defenses with the Jets, with the 49ers before he was with the Jets, and he's been a part of a lot of great defensive staffs. So I don't believe that he's this incapable coach. I do believe that his time just may be up in New York, where last year was very unfortunate. Rodgers goes down with the Achilles. They never really have a shot. And before that, they're scrambling with Zach Wilson. It's not good. And you just wonder how long the hook is going to be here. And who knows? I mean, if everything gets turned around and it all comes together and it's just like the Jets just need time to grow, he might be safe. But I think his seat is very hot just given the circumstance. And then number 1, I think Saleh has a chance to be fired during the season if it was to all fall apart. I also really believe that this number 1 coach has a high risk of being fired during the season, and that is Doug Peterson of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, the Jaguars are the last team in the league to not have a win. They are 0-4, and their schedule is not getting much easier. In fact, let's see. Who do they have next? I know that next up for them is the Vikings, or I believe it is. Who's next for Jacksonville? Oh no, excuse me. No, different team as the Vikings. My bad. So they have the Colts next, not easy. The Bears next, not easy. The Patriots. You would assume that by the Patriots they would get it, and if they're still losing games, if they were to lose the next 3, God forbid, and drop to 0 and what, that'd be what, 7? That would be very, very bad. Because right after that, you got Packers, Eagles, Vikings, Lions, Texans again. Then you get the Titans. But if they don't get a win here very soon, they're staring down the barrel of a very difficult stretch of their schedule. And given that Shad Khan was sitting there saying that this is the best team that the Jaguars have ever assembled in their entire history, and they expect to win now, when the owner is saying that, that is a scary, scary scenario when you start 0-4, because for all intents and purposes, their season's over. They would have to. They're not going to run down the Texans, I don't imagine, to win the division. So they got to hope that they get a wild card spot, and you basically have to compete with the entirety of the AFC North for that. And I don't know. They would have to make a miraculous turnaround, but the Jags have fired coaches in season before. They look like they're staring down a tough time. I got a bad feeling that Doug Peterson is not going to make it through the year in Jacksonville. Do I think that's particularly fair? No, I don't really think he's the right guy for the job, but I don't believe he's like this huge problem for the Jaguars. I think that their issues are much more systemic and organizational than simply the coach. But if you look at Doug Peterson's history, other than the one great year in Philly where they won the Super Bowl, then the one awful year in Philly that got him fired in Philly, other than that, he's a very consistent head coach of being like right around 500. They'll be, 9-8, 8-9, and I don't know if Jacksonville's happy with that. They seem to believe that they could shoot higher than that. And I get the feeling that Doug Peterson, the time is just coming in Jacksonville. Okay, so the next ones I'm going to do. So every single year, there's a coach that is a surprise fire. It's often somebody that's only a year or so in, or it's a coach that everybody thinks is really good who all of a sudden gets fired. So I'm going to do who I think the surprise fire is going to be. Then I'm going to give you somebody who might be on the hot seat but shouldn't be, and someone who doesn't seem to be on the hot seat but should be. So let's start with somebody who might be on the hot seat but should not be, and that is Mike McDaniel of the Miami Dolphins. There's a lot going around about why can't Miami succeed with their backup quarterback? Is Mike McDaniel doing a good job? And I think, in short, the answer is yes. He's doing a good job. I think he's a very good coach. His offense is clearly a little bit more complicated, and I will admit this: it is a organizational failure, a front office failure, a coaching failure. It is a failure on all fronts. That the Dolphins, when you have a quarterback who has an injury history like Tua Tagovailoa's, that you do not have a backup situation ready to go. There are plenty of quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks who are not the most physically gifted, but are good at making quick decisions and distributing the ball. Oftentimes, those are the skills that backup quarterbacks do have. And the fact that Miami does not seem to have one of those guys, that's an indictment on everybody. And does Mike McDaniel have his share of blame here? Yes. But you committed to Tua. Mike McDaniel's very good at making Tua Tagovailoa look very good. And if he was to be fired, there are other organizations that would immediately hire him as their head coach. Immediately. There are organizations who would fire their coach to hire Mike McDaniel as the head coach. And the only reason I think that he would be on the hot seat, even though an injury to his quarterback is likely going to be the thing that ends the year for the Dolphins, is that Miami's ownership has done this type of thing before. They surprise fired Brian Flores right before hiring Mike McDaniel. And so I can't rule out that Dolphins ownership would do something drastic, even when it would very clearly be a hasty and foolish move. So somebody that doesn't seem to be on the hot seat that should be, in my opinion, is Zach Taylor of the Cincinnati Bengals. I know that everybody's expecting the Bengals to turn it around and they'll go on a roll and they'll likely make the playoffs. I am of the opinion that they probably will too, but I do not like Zach Taylor as the Bengals coach anymore. I think that the only reason he is still in Cincinnati is because they were so bad that they got to draft Joe Burrow. Had they not been that bad in that year, he would have been fired years ago. And even with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, every single year, the Bengals start the year unprepared, low intensity. They come out, they dig themselves in a hole, and they always have to find a way to dig themselves out. This is a team that should be competing for the Super Bowl every single year with Joe Burrow under center. And I believe Zach Taylor is an active hindrance to that rather than a help. There are other coaches where if you look at it, if you were to say, take Mike McDaniel, if he was the coach in Cincinnati, the Bengals would be much better off. Obviously, we're going to go towards the high end here for this stuff. But if the Bengals were to have Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell, guys like that, like these dudes who are other young offensive coaches who actively elevate their teams, the Bengals would be so much better. But they don't have that. This is another team where if I was the Bengals, and I think the main reason that this won't happen is because their owner is Mike Brown, and he is notoriously cheap. But this is another team that if they can try to get Ben Johnson, if they could get Ben Johnson, the Bengals are a bona fide Super Bowl contender every single year. But as it stands right now, every big game that the Bengals go into, they are at a coaching disadvantage. And I think that's a damn shame because the rest of that team's very talented and they clearly have the potential to do great things. But this year, the other thing that's different as well, their defense isn't up to par so far. And if you're going to tell me that they're going to start slow, their defense isn't going to be great, because what's happened in the past is the whole team starts slow and then the whole team locks in. If you're only going to get one half of this team to lock in, are they going to be able to really turn on the way they have in the past? And I don't know. And I just believe that for the Bengals to really reach their full potential, someone other than Zach Taylor might be needed at the helm. And then last up, the coach that I think could be the surprise fire. So for me, this is a coach that is in his first year, maybe his second year, who it just feels like these teams might be out on. And the one that I'm looking at that is scaring me is Antonio Pierce with the Raiders. As of right now, the Raiders are 2-2, but they aren't necessarily blowing the doors off anybody. And now you have Devontae Adams requesting a trade from Las Vegas. So you have a team that's not particularly good. You have one of the top two players on this team requesting a trade. And you have an owner who didn't really seem to want to give Antonio Pierce this job, but because of just a swell of support in the locker room, he gave him the job. And I think this goes back to when Rich Bisaccia, the players wanted him, they didn't hire him, they hired Josh McDaniels, and it didn't go well. That I think Mark Davis, in a way, got forced into the Antonio Pierce hire. And I think that he could be in danger. If the Raiders do really poorly and you have great players wanting to leave, that's a recipe for an owner to be unhappy. And then I suppose this is one extra one, but I don't think this one's going to happen, so it would be a real surprise. But we don't know exactly how much this ownership group is willing to just pay out for somebody to go away. depending on how bad they are, what are the Walmart folk willing to put up with Sean Payton? I don't believe that they would do this. I believe that in drafting Bo Nix, they've committed to Sean Payton to have the chance to develop him. But if the Broncos offense remains anemic and they're paying a lot of money to Sean Payton, for an ownership group where money really is of no object, would they pull the trigger? I don't believe so, which is why I've gone with Antonio Pierce as the surprise fire. So those are the coaches that I believe are on the hot seat a quarter of the way through the year. This will obviously evolve as the year goes on. So yeah, once again, hit like, hit subscribe. Thanks so much for tuning into the home team. Peace.